From every talk show to daytime program that I've seen on Philippine television, as much as Filipino celebrities love to gossip about other celebrities, they also love to gossip about themselves. While many tabloids in the United States actively still compete with each other, digging around for the next celebrity scandal to be the first to leak it, it feels like Filipino celebrities are more than willing to walk into the studio to just pay off a network and give them all their own dirty laundry to air out themselves. There is certainly a historical precedent as to why Filipino culture has such a flair to participate and engage in the melodramatic. It is apparent in our music, the most popular programs, and the memes that do trend. No matter what you do, you have to make a scene. Because something about pretending that there is always an audience compels us to push our limits to go even further. More ridiculous, even. Just as much as the potential origins of this tendency to stir drama among other Filipinos unfortunately carries some negative implications, this is even more apparent in how it has impacted the scene of Philippine politics. Ask any Filipino as to why the political scene is the mess it is, and you will usually get sparse but legitimate and the very true simple answers like money and corruption. But it can't go without saying that showbiz-like reputations and cult of personalities are a huge part of it as well. So it is no wonder that anyone who manages to be the loudest is cramming themselves in the room.
BBM! 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 BBM!
Although there are many things that point to why the Marcoses have such a loyalist following to this day, it is important to recognize how their own flaunting of excess, theatrics, and indulgence actually played a role in cementing their power, despite it being the biggest argument against them. Not only did the recurring presence of the video camera and changing methods in news coverage around the late 80s to early 90s played a pivotal part in documenting their day-to-day lives, Imelda Marcos was and is an instrumental player to this massive PR campaign that is attempting to revise history. With their lives constantly on the camera, the Filipino penchant for melodrama and performance worked in the Marcoses' favor to reframe and reconstruct their image as a desirable, perfect family, and more specifically, Imelda's.
This is about mommy. Louder.
Hindi na nag-iisip ng politika kasi marami siyang problemang yun eh.
Sa akin, pananaw, wala pa akong nakitang kasing galing na... She's one of the best...
the master yun eh.
She's one of the best politicians I know.
Imelda Romualdez was born in Manila to a dynasty, but compared to other members of her extended family in the Romualdez clan, she had a troubled domestic home life, from the many failed ventures of her father, and eventually the death of her biological mother when she was still a child. That said, the inconveniences of Imelda's childhood was of course not at all comparable to other lives dealing with the rampant poverty throughout the rest of the country. But no doubt she had to grow up with a confused sense of what living with privilege meant. On top of that, she was also coming from a particular generation of Filipinos that were all still reeling from the impact of World War II. Imelda herself claimed that she actually encountered Douglas MacArthur and Irving Berlin, composer of many classic American songs such as God Bless America, and sang for them, somewhere in some undated time in her childhood.
He had me cold. He said to me, Imelda, you sing. This is Irving Berlin. Little did I know who he was. So I sang, God bless the Philippines, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. And then he said, Imelda, that's not God bless the Philippines. Oh no, I said, that's God bless the Philippines because my teachers taught me that. Oh no, that's not God bless the Philippines, that's God bless America. Because I composed it, he said.
As a young woman, Imelda actively participated in local beauty pageants and won both titles and praise for her looks and charismatic personality. Beauty pageants are pretty substantial in small communities in the Philippines, Hence why the big ones people can name off the top of their head, like Miss Universe, get pretty hyped up whenever one of her own makes it that far. Through these endeavors, Imelda quickly learned that people liked her appearance, and that appearances indeed mattered to get anywhere. She developed a positive reputation in her community and grabbed the attention of figures of significance. As a result, one thing led to another that would bring her towards her future husband, a budding politician by the name of Ferdinand Marcos. Despite the fact that he was engaged to someone else at that point in time, Ferdinand was so entranced by Imelda that he proposed to her on the spot. And well, the rest was history.
Ako, Ferdinand E. Marcos, ng Batak, Lalawigan ng Ilocos Norte.
One of the biggest debates around Imelda Marcos is questions around her complacency and direct involvement with the atrocities associated with her husband's presidential administration, or more accurately, dictatorship. Certain opinions want to continue stressing that it is not fair that Imelda should face discipline for crimes she personally did not commit or endorse, but there is video that implies otherwise. Lots of it. From the very beginnings of their relationship, Imelda Marcos was a team player to her husband's bid for the presidency. This was the first time a politician's spouse was visibly proactive in their significant other's career, and video was now starting to be used more widely in press and politics.
Before, yung wives ng mga presidente, they were just housewives. They never meddled in the campaigning. They never bothered. But then when Mrs. Marcos came, she started campaigning for the president.
Imelda was often right next to her husband on the campaign trail. To the public, they appeared as a power couple. Not only were rallies and their interactions with citizens captured on camera for everyone to see, but many bouts of their domestic life too. They were often likened to the Kennedys in the United States, and were at times described like a love team.
My heart to one of your loveliest daughters of the Visayas, Imelda Marcos.
And just like what often love teams do together, they sung. Pop culture in the Philippines at this time was mixed with important work from the United States, and a newly emerging genre finally began to fill in a demographic that was previously not recognized: romance stories for the teen and young adult market. On top of that, with song and dance being such an integral part of Filipino daily culture, musical sequences were also being incorporated into many films. In Philippine media, a love team is a phrase simply describing an on-screen romantic pairing. It is an equivalent to what shipping is, except it usually refers to a pairing that ends up becoming canonical and ends up intersecting the actors' real lives and careers, in which they may continue to co-star as a love interest to the other half of their pair in future work, or even enter an actual relationship with them. I highly recommend Ika de Leon's video, A Comprehensive History on Filipino Love Teams, which talks about this phenomenon in its modern iteration in more detail, using the relationship between actors Catherine Bernardo and Daniel Padilla as an example. Essentially, Imelda and Ferdinand were a couple that many justifiably saw as admirable and noble as a cohesive political unit, all while filling in the other qualities of what is popular in mass entertainment. They not only seemed like they had integrity in their civic duties, but they had a seemingly happy home life, with the image of the ideal Filipino family that was desirable. Perhaps even far more akin to a royal family of sorts. But of course, the truth is that the home life for the Marcoses was not entirely happy, and Ferdinand faced many accusations of infidelity, and a number of them have been proven to be true. This also goes back to the fact that when Ferdinand was technically still with another woman, when he was wooing Imelda, he even already had children of that said previous relationship. On camera, Imelda has otherwise expressed she felt like she had a perfect relationship with her late husband, and still holds a lot of love for him. Rarely is it talked about that Imelda had a neuropsychological breakdown early on in her marriage, and went to the United States for treatment due to the stresses of politics now dominating her life, and what were already early signs of instability in her marriage.
Did you want to be a simple girl?
Well,
On a
I
simple
did
farm?
not. I could not say that. But I really could not stand politics. But when I was being brought to almost yearly after we got married to New York for
Psychiatric
almost, I was on the verge of a breakdown.
But going from First Lady to be, and ultimately First Lady, Imelda had to put on a face of strength and dignity in the adversity of struggles. And as a former beauty queen who is used to eyes casting judgment on her, she knows this. In the first couple of years of the Marcos administration, an assassination attempt was made on Imelda, and wherever the Marcoses go, the cameras follow, and thus this rather harrowing moment was captured on film. Before being completely pursued, the assailant only managed to slash at Imelda's arms. No doubt that this was still a rather horrible, scary thing for this to happen to anyone, but I personally think this was a huge watershed moment for Imelda, especially in how she would be perceived in the eyes of the public thereon out. In Ramona S. Diaz's Imelda would joke about the situation looking back on it, and made a decision to not get further work done to cover up her scars as a badge of honor, a prospect even encouraged by Ferdinand. Although it is common to resort to dark humor to recover from bad experiences, in recollecting the moment she was confronting possible death, Imelda expressed that she was actually embarrassed at the idea that she was going to be killed by such an ugly weapon.
Oh God, I said, if there's somebody who's going to kill me, why do they have to, Lord, why is it to be a bolo that is so ugly? It should have been such I wish they put some kind of a yellow ribbon or some kind of a nice thing with this kind of an ugly instrument. Why such an ugly instrument to kill me? I said. Anyway, I was still joking at that point.
Saying ridiculous and rather strange off-kilter things would be a recurring feature of her. Imelda-isms, as I would personally refer to them. It makes Imelda amusing and approachable. On the flip side, it is juxtaposed with something very serious that makes her dignified, and in this particular incident, martyr-like.
Maybe the Lord saved my life because I was pretty generous in the giving, in the serving, in the caring for my fellow men.
But with that large of an ego to belittle death itself, always comes with excess. The flair for the theatrics and flamboyant becomes very characteristic and expected for much of Imelda's life. Imelda was the front-facing part in spearheading much of the infrastructural projects of the Marcos administration. A couple examples such as commissioning the now long abandoned and memorialized as cursed Manila Film Center, and a safari that displaced a whole community, the latter which was specifically explored in Lauren Greenfield's The Kingmaker. Critics described many of these construction projects as flagrant and unnecessary. Filipino activist and artist Benjamin Cervantes was responsible for initially coining what would be the term edifice complex, in criticizing the excess of these projects as political propaganda. Bigger somehow equates to better, and quantity over quality, so of course one cannot have a conversation around Imelda Marcos without talking about the infamous shoes.
Please, I'm begging you. This would make my life.
Yes.
Can I see your shoes?
Oh!
It would make my life.
And now for her world-famous 2,600 pairs of shoes.
Shoes. Her 2,200 pairs of shoes.
Most of her shoes is from Beltrami, Ferragamo, Oleg Cassini, Bruno Magli.
The shoes quickly became legend.
So, there we are, in Manila, in the middle of a state banquet, when who barges into the room? None other than Imelda Marcos. She makes a beeline straight for me, saying she's desperate to show me her, wait for it, shoe collection. Shell collection.
Are you sure? She was probably trying to say shoe and you misunderstood her.
Did she have something in her teeth? Shoe. Shell.
I don't know why they made such a fuss of the shoes.
When Malacanang Palace was stormed and ransacked when the Marcoses fled the country, marking the end of martial law and the beginnings of Corazon Aquino's presidency, citizens finally got to see and strip down the walls that were hiding exuberant amounts of wealth, such as Imelda Marcos's huge wardrobe of thousands of shoes, many pairs valued at hundreds of US dollars, which is an enormous multiplied value compared to the Philippine peso.
And the sad thing about this is that the average per capita income of the Filipino is roughly the cost of one pair of her evening shoes.
And since then, no one can stop talking about those damn shoes. Even within a relatively obscure, short-lived sketch comedy series called On the Television, tried to take on making fun of Imelda, like what many others were doing in the comedy world at that point in time, inspired by the publicly released scenes of the ransacking of the palace. The sketch depicted scenes of the concept of a fake series called Our Maid Imelda, in which Imelda Marcos lands a job as a maid in order to help pay off the family's debts. Although the sketch unfortunately has some racist stereotypes, such as the over-exaggeration of Imelda's accent, it goes into things such as Imelda's passion for breaking out into song, lapses into ego, and once again, the shoes. The shoes end up becoming Imelda Marcos's one defining trait in the mainstream consciousness, as both the joke and the punchline. And of course, with time, Imelda herself started punching down.
The shoes also was something that really saved me all throughout, because after all, when they went to my closets, they found shoes, not skeletons.
Like, are you kidding? That's such a ridiculous thing to say. The shoes themselves were such an inescapable global phenomenon that of course she would be so hyper aware of how much it was tampering with her image. So she turned it around and made it her own again. It's a completely deliberate move to water down and diminish all the bad things the shoes are associated with. And yet, it's funny. The first time I watched this recording, I laughed. It's such an outlandish, unexpected statement. And she says it with a completely straight, smiling face. But whether knowingly intentional or not, this is exactly how Imelda Marcos has charmed her way with people for so many years. She has ended up repeating variations of this exact quote when still asked about the shoes to this day. It's just like when a bombastic line in a teleseries is dropped.
You're nothing but a second rate, trying hard, copycat.
It's memorable, it's mimetic, and it's campy. It has distanced Imelda from bad things she was associated and complicit with, and in turn made her go from politics to parody to iconic. It all comes down to putting on a performance, and I think Imelda does behave like there is a show she always feels compelled to perform for. This idea becomes both the literal and metaphorical basis for David Byrne and Fatboy Slim's concept album, Here Lies Love, which looks at Imelda Marcos through the lens of a musical romp that was also later adapted as a live, interactive show. When the Marcoses were exiled in Hawaii, cameras still could not stop following their every move. In the late 80s to 90s, the 24 hours news cycle format was starting to see its way into how things were being covered, and there was intrigue to this notorious family. Loyalists local to the land that tried to visit and connect with the family drew even more attention to them, like fans flocking to their favorite band. The cameras would not even stop to the ends of Ferdinand's deathbed, such as capturing the very moment when Imelda heard the startling news that her husband was dying in the middle of an interview. Similar to how much cameras managed to benefit the First Family's campaign to get into and secure the right to be in office, the constant documentation of their lives, even when they lost political power, borderline felt like the world was being treated to an early taste of reality television, forcing you to confront these people as humans, despite the crimes they committed, and to specifically feel empathy for a woman at her all-time low while losing her husband. And as Ferdinand's health soon completely failed him, the cameras still continued to follow Imelda to the courts when all of the criminal suits and charges started rolling in against her family. The cameras captured a woman wearing black, a woman mourning. She even fainted during trials. She is carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. This image rallied enough sympathy she needed to be acquitted of all charges of a case she had to face in New York City in 1988 for racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Right after, she went to St. Patrick's Cathedral and prayed. And sure enough, swarms of people were ensured that they will see Imelda Marcos praying. I also like to think that Imelda Marcos was genuinely grieving, genuinely convinced that she was in the worst shape of her life and was feeling the stress of it to the point where she would actually faint from being overwhelmed. As examples have emphasized, it is also not a stretch to theorize there are aspects to it, though, where she did possibly play it up for the public. Even with Ferdinand long gone, her life continued to be a running PR campaign to beseech forgiveness for him, for their family, and acquittal of any wrongdoing that may or may not have occurred. But as often as Imelda has said and done outrageous things, she perhaps does actually believe it all. Especially towards her older years, she has often likened herself as being a mother to all, a mother to the Filipino people, which may have stemmed from growing up in an unconventional household where she was deprived of her own mother.
Whenever I prayed, it was her name I said, Mama Mary. In school, I was told to behave like her, to be Mary-like. And do you believe that you've stayed Mary-like?
I had no other symbol, and I lost my mother early on. Yes, and so I had to create my own mother. I could not read yet. I was a little girl, and I did not know about the great women of history.
And did you
And
picture
the
your
first
mother
thing was
as Mother Mary?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
She equates flaunting excess and opulence as a positive trait and feels as though it's an act of bringing beauty to the world, to those who need it the most.
There are some people who would look at the Marcos style and call you extravagant.
Yes, it is an extravagance and not, but at the same time, as First Lady, I have to practically flaunt love and beauty so that the 50 million Filipinos will see what is to love and what is to positively feel and what is perfection.
At some point in Imelda's camp is on some bus, and they stop by a group of approaching people who want to draw their attention. While normally in other similar situations that have been captured on camera, Imelda has gone out of her way to offer people money. But in this case, she's just giving them photos of her face, of Imelda's face when she was young. Not even of, like, her husband. Like, is there anything on or behind the photos, like information or something? I don't think so. No, they're just her photos. I'm not sure if she even had the audacity to sign them at least. But it's just spreading her. It's just spreading her image, the good word of her, and that's all you need to know. When she was acquitted back in the 1988 case in New York, she also sent photos to the jurors as gifts. She at least signed those, however. But again, this mode of behavior, it's iconic. Imelda is so dedicated to these ideas, tied with the fact that she is some sort of ambassador for beauty, that she has written and journaled in detail a whole esoteric belief system around it. American-British TV personality and comedian Ruby Wax was able to conduct a visit to Imelda, which was right around her return to the Philippines after the family's exile in Hawaii. It was part of a series she did for the BBC and framed the visit like a serious interview, while peppering it with very blatant satire throughout the whole thing, and edited in such a way that juxtaposes what Imelda was saying to archival footage. At some point, Imelda even dresses up and sings, while Wax makes fun of the extravagance of it all. Years later, Ruby Wax was able to reflect back on the visit, explaining that Imelda was someone she immediately sensed and read as a person who truly believed what they were saying and had to play along with it.
I had to forget that she stole, 17 billion. I put that aside. It's not my job to make judgment. But I saw the girl who wanted to be the showgirl.
According to Carmen Navarro Pedrosa, a journalist who wrote several biographical accounts of Imelda Marcos, and whose own family was forced to flee to exile during martial law, Imelda has fabricated and exaggerated many parts of her life. It is easy to cast this all off as Imelda Marcos being simply delusional. She yearns for a past she saw differently compared to many of the victims of her husband's ruling, such as continuing to dress and style herself in a traditional terno gown, contemporary to something associated with her youth and nostalgic to the Marcos administration itself. However, Imelda was, and still is, an intelligent, educated woman, and that, and her staying influence and its dangers should not be dismissed. After all, that is what Ferdinand saw in her to begin with.
Put it this way. Even my father, I don't think would object if I say she's the supreme politician in the family. My father is the statesman. He's the political genius. He's all that. My mother can connect with anyone.
Ferdinand himself has outright explicitly mentioned Imelda as someone he saw equal to him, even endowing her with the prospect that she should inherit the presidential seat right after him. She managed to go her way into developing connections with various world leaders, many of which are very controversial. When looking back on these encounters, she romanticized them as mere personal friendships. At some point, Imelda was even weaponized to circumvent various Marcos scandals, such as Ferdinand's alleged extramarital affairs, by having her go as far as to fake a miscarriage tragedy.
I actually talked to one of her press aides at the time who said, we wrote these releases wincing because they knew that it was all fake.
It is how, in a lot of ways, the actors and artistas that play a part and perform in the theater of Philippine politics as is was likely drawn from and influenced by the Marcoses' own playbook. Just as how Joseph Estrada developed a reputation by having been an actor first, nonetheless never ended up finishing a proper presidential term and would become the first chief executive of an Asian country to be formally impeached, thanks to the second reckoning of another people's power revolution for his engagement in plunder. And just as how, when Rodrigo Duterte says something completely unhinged and unaccounted for in the middle of a press
Siguro
conference,
katatapos lang, kumain ka rin. So kinain ni Adam. Then malice was born. Who is this stupid God? Stupido talaga itong putang kung ganun. You created something perfect, and then you think of an event that would tempt and destroy the quality of your work.
Yet his administration's campaign for the war on drugs accounts for one of the worst human rights abuses in the Philippines' recent history. Propping up a stage for entertainment can serve as a distraction against the misdeeds going on behind the scenes. The evolution of video has uprooted and defined much of our lives beyond just catering to and shaping our means of entertainment, such as being instrumental to the press and aiding in the work of investigation. But despite the fact that the Marcoses' own crimes have been recorded, support for them has not wavered. Scandal and sin have been instead turned into sensation. And instead of what would have been the most tangible way of outing a shameful legacy, the lens has instead made people like Imelda Marcos a superstar. The Marcoses have sustained a cult-like following despite everything, even to deified-like proportions, and thanks to Imelda Marcos' prowess. Perhaps Imelda herself will never get to sit in the presidential seat like the late Ferdinand predicted, but in her survival, in her imprint that she has left upon pop culture, she has continued to be that extension of power he wanted, and has even done more than enough of what was expected of her.
I have great faith na mamimili sila sa talagang pananaw nila ang pinakamagaling, pinakamarunong. Sa pangalan, sa oo, sa yung anong pangalan, kilala o hindi. Yes,
Ako, I'm not an apologist for political dynasties by any means. Sa akin, dapat wala ng political dynasty.
And once you're in the limelight, you have to keep working for that attention. After all, in order to keep your audience, you have to put on a good show.
So many play at love, and hardly any stay in love. I'm so glad there is you. More than ever, I'm so glad there is you.
Bidyotasan is a video essay series dedicated to discussing and analyzing Filipino-centered media. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you! Imelda, directed by Ramona S. Diaz, is available to watch in its entirety for free on YouTube, through the director's YouTube channel, Vimeo, and the Internet Archive. The Kingmaker, directed by Lauren Greenfield, is also available to watch on various streaming platforms. This video is inspired by and dedicated to the continuing countless acts of altruism and activism that aims to uphold and protect the sovereignty of the Philippines and Filipino people. Never again, never forget. And thank you to the ancestors who have laid and tilled the ground before me.